Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Today is Vesak Day, a very special day. It was the day the Bodhisattva was born, the day he became the Supreme Buddha, and the day our Buddha passed into Nibbāna. So we all know it is a very special day for Buddhists throughout the world. However, if you look at the Dhamma and you think carefully, this is not a special day only for Buddhists. It's a special day for all beings throughout the universe. The Buddha, the fully enlightened one, arises in the world out of compassion to all beings and tries to help all those that can be helped, to help them escape from the suffering of samsara. So it is a special day for everyone, whether you're a Buddhist or not, whether you accept the Dhamma or not. Let's take a look and investigate more closely. There are many reasons we can consider as to why the coming of a Buddha is special to everyone. The Buddha is the only person who can describe the benefits of dana or offerings in detail. He explains many details and many things with regard to what goes into making a good offering. He will explain how the mind should be before the offering, during an offering, and after an offering. He will explain why it is important to have wholesome thoughts throughout all these events of offering, how each thought strengthens another and increases the strength of the kusala or wholesome mind. The Buddha can also tell us how defilements such as greed or conceit or anger reduce the strength of our wholesome deed. The Buddha provides all these details. I have not heard of any other teacher providing so much information just about offerings. Then the Buddha is the only person who can explain all the benefits of virtue or sila. If a person guards their sila for one day, what are the effects? If a person guards their sila for 1 year, what are the effects? How will this virtue or sila take him to a good destiny in the next life? How will it help him when he decides to meditate? How it reinforces the kusala or wholesome deeds he does during offerings or when he listens to the Dhamma. The Buddha will explain what types of minds incline to virtue, what minds do not. How can a person destroy his own virtue? The Buddha's explanations go into some of the subtlest details. An example, if a monk has a thought to steal a pen, then with this thought he makes the effort to steal a pen that's lying on a table, then according to Dhamma, as soon as he lifts the pen off the table, it is considered he broke his virtue and committed the act of stealing. Even if he returns the pen to its original place a second later, the act of stealing is done. He is just simply returning the pen he stole. If you look at it from a legal point or from the law today, no one would say the pen was stolen if it was returned. However, if we investigate the person's mind and go into its minute details, we will see he first stole it, and then a few seconds later, he returned the pen that he stole earlier. So, of course, his virtue is broken, even though it took only a few mind moments to do so. So the Buddha's teachings of sila go into all such fine details, and There is no other teacher that goes into such detail when discussing virtue or sila. Then let's also talk about concentration. Again, the Buddha goes into all the details about samadhi or concentration. What objects can be used to develop concentration? What objects cannot be used to develop concentration? How the mind progresses through concentration. What are the highest levels of concentration? How do you make concentration stronger? How can you use a concentrated mind to see the past or to see the future, to hear faraway sounds, or to read another person's mind? Who can develop concentration? Who cannot? What components of the mind reinforce concentration? What components destroy concentration? No teacher can explain all the facets of concentration like the Buddha. And then finally, let's look at how Buddha teaches us to develop wisdom. The Buddha gives all the information necessary to develop wisdom up to the point of attainment of Nibbāna. A small example, he describes 89 types of consciousness. 89 types of minds can arise in a certain being. Have you ever heard of anyone describing 89 types of consciousness? Freud? Nietzsche? No. Only the Buddha teaches this. He teaches how these minds arise, what they cognize, how they perish, how long they last, their benefits of certain minds, the detrimental nature of other minds. How does one see these minds or discern these minds? What helps us understand them clearer? What prevents us from understanding them? There are many ways and angles to look at minds. What else arises with the mind? Does the mind arise alone? Does consciousness arise alone? No, the Buddha teaches consciousness arises with perception. It arises with experiencing. It arises with volition. It arises with one-pointedness. The Buddha teaches anger and greed can never arise in the same mind together. So many things the Buddha taught with respect to the mind. Unwholesome minds arise with unwholesome mental factors. Wholesome minds arise with wholesome mental factors. Wholesome cannot arise with unwholesome. Unwholesome cannot arise with wholesome. Only the Buddha or his disciples teach these things. No other teacher can teach this Dhamma. And then, what's the most wonderful part, or one of the most wonderful parts about the Buddha's teachings is that it can all be practically experienced if a person follows the Buddha's teachings correctly. One can know for oneself directly. And then the Buddha's teachings help spread goodness. It is for the purity of the mind. It is fully or wholly beneficial. And most importantly, the Buddha's teachings contribute to the extinction of all suffering, contribute to escaping samsara. So if you think about all these things that I just mentioned, and of course there's so many things I cannot mention because only a Buddha knows all the blessings of the Buddha. But if you just look at these things, you can understand the coming of a Buddha to the world is a very special event. And it is special to all beings. Of course, if we take advantage of the opportunity to learn and practice his teachings, it is very beneficial. And so we can say Buddha's coming to the world is a very special event for all beings. Now on this special day, this Vesak Day, I want to focus my brief Dhamma talk on the Buddha's teaching of Anatta. I will of course not be able to talk about all aspects of anatta, but I want to talk about anatta enough so that the listener will think, incline, and try to learn more about this important part of the Dhamma. Anatta means no self. Atta means self. So anatta means no self. If we dive deeply into this meaning, it can also mean no thing. No thing as in no permanent entity. The word thing exists in opposition to self, he, she, etc. So if there's no self, then we can understand that there's actually no thing. Please try to remember this point while we continue to discuss about anatta. Now, anatta is a very important part of Buddha's teachings. However, a lot of people these days might not discuss about anatta that much and spend more time discussing anicca or impermanence and dukkha or suffering. There may be several reasons for this pattern to exist. For one thing, anicca is somewhat easier to understand. Impermanence is somewhat easier to understand. When things break, flowers wilt, a person passes away, then our mind quickly reflects, oh, everything is impermanent. Everything is anicca. It is easier to think like this and then relate it somewhat to the Buddha's Dhamma version of anicca. I say somewhat because actually the true meaning of anicca in the Dhamma is much deeper than what the general world thinks when they think of the word impermanence. The true meaning of anicca can only be understood through meditation. However, these periodic events that I mentioned earlier help us consider impermanent, help us understand impermanent as we can relate it to the word anicca. So it's a little bit easier to think of anicca and to discuss anicca. The same way, when we look at dukkha, dukkha is also similar. When someone dies, we feel sorrow. When we get sick, we feel pain. When the person you love hurts you, you feel sadness. When we get old and remember all the horrible things we did, it torments our mind. So much suffering, so much dukkha. And people can use these events to understand and relate it to the meaning of dukkha in terms of Dhamma. So again, anicca and dukkha are somewhat relatable to all beings or to most beings, and it's something we can understand. But anatta, how do you think of anatta? So yes, dukkha is relatable to all beings and can be understood to a certain extent by all beings. But how about anatta? How do you think of anatta? How do we relate to anatta? Some people think of emptiness as anatta, voidness as anatta. The problem with thinking of anatta, and I repeat, thinking anatta, the problem with thinking anatta is that it is actually very difficult to think. When we think of anatta, you invariably get caught up in thinking of something as atta and then thinking anatta. Let's take an example and try to understand what I just said. Close your eyes and think, oh, the universe is empty. When you thought of that sentence or thought of that thought, you will understand that you actually took the word universe, or what you perceive as the universe, and then thought it is empty. So you would notice at that first take, when your mind thinks universe, it has already taken the universe as a thing, as Atta or as self. Then the mind proceeds to think, oh, this thing is void or this thing is empty. However, the damage is already done because you've already thought of a thing and you're now thinking that this thing is empty. So this is one of the things that actually, or this is one of the factors that makes it difficult for us to think anatta or to think of no self. Let's try again and take a Dhamma object, for instance. Let's take Patavi or earth element. Again, let's think earth element is empty. Earth element is void. Again, we have taken the object earth element as a thing or as a self. And then we are now deciding or thinking that this thing is empty. So this is why it's a little bit more difficult to think of anatta and to think of anatta compared to anicca and dukkha. And it's probably one of the reasons why people actually don't think and discuss anatta as much. Some points to consider. Language itself is very much built on the existence of self or the existence of things. And then the other point is, when we think of voidness or when we think of emptiness, we have a tendency to think of it relative to the existence of things or self. Even in the case of an empty glass, we say it's empty relative to the existence of the glass or to the existence of water that was previously maybe in it. So again, the mind has difficulty in thinking anatta, and it's probably one of the reasons why a lot of people don't discuss or delve into anatta. And even when they do, they cannot make a deep dive into it because our thought patterns are automatically restrained, as can be seen by some of the things we just discussed. So how did the Buddha teach anatta? How did the Buddha help his disciples and followers understand anatta? If you look at the Dhamma, we can see that the Buddha used many methods and examples to help his disciples understand anatta. Today, I want to use some of the methods the Buddha described in meditation and use these methods to understand anatta. One of the first times a meditator comes across anatta is when he is discerning nama rupa, or when he is discerning mentality and materiality. When discerning mentality and materiality, there are 4 defining devices by which these mentality and materiality can be delimited. One of them is characteristic, also known as lakkana, the quality of the phenomenon. Another one is function or rasa, which is its performance of a certain task or achievement of a certain goal. Then the other one is manifestation, pachupattana, the way it presents itself within an experience. And then the fourth one is proximate cause or padattana, which is basically the proximate condition or cause which this mentality or materiality depends on. So now let us take an example of discerning a nama, for instance. Let us take the example of discerning feeling or vedana. In our example, we will use discerning sukha vedana. The lakkana for sukha vedana is experiencing a desirable object. The rasa or function is to intensify the associated states, the associated mental states that arise with it. The manifestation, it manifests itself as aid or help. while the proximate cause is tranquility. So how does the meditator discern this, and how does this illustrate anatta? Well, when the meditator first develops concentration and then uses concentration to discern these qualities directly. So he will discern lakkana, he will discern rasa, he will discern pachupattana, he will discern padattana repeatedly. The more he discerns this, the more knowledge he has with regard to this, in our example, Vedana. The more he discerns this, he will begin to understand that Vedana itself is actually these four qualities or these four defining factors. At the beginning, someone might think there is something called Vedana, and Vedana has these four qualities. But as we discern deeper and deeper, we understand that it is these four factors that we actually refer to as Vedana. Furthermore, when we discern deeper and deeper, and the wisdom about Vedana increases, we begin to understand that even the words that defined these four qualities begin to disappear, and we just know directly the meaning of these four qualities. When I say directly, what I mean is the mind knows directly that experiencing a desirable object is lakkana, intensifying associated states is rasa, pachupattana is aid, and padattana is tranquility. He knows this directly, each one directly. And when the mind knows these directly, it begins to understand that you cannot find a self in experiencing a desirable object. You cannot find a self in intensifying associated mental states. You cannot find a self in aid or help. And you cannot find a self or thing in tranquility. This knowledge is what we begin to understand as anatta of Vedana. So this is one of the first times the yogi or the meditator begins to understand anatta when it comes to meditation. The next stage of meditation, which is referred to as purification by overcoming doubt, is another stage where anatta begins to become clear. In this stage, the meditator again discerns lakkana, rasa, pachupattana, padattana of conditions or causes and the conditioned or effects. So the meditator will discern lakkana, rasa, pachupattana, padattana of the causes and the effects. As they continue to do this, again, they will begin to know that these causes or conditions are anatta, and the effects are also anatta. By doing this, they will also know and understand this phenomena of void conditionality. Let's take an example. When we discern kamma, we will know that the result is not in kamma. We will also know that there is no kamma in the result. So kamma vipaka. In kamma, there is no kamma vipaka. And in kamma vipaka, there is no kamma. Kamma and kamma results are themselves void of one another. One acts as a condition for the other. And once this begins to become clearer and clearer, we understand that anatta is existent in both the causes and the effects. This is also one of the reasons that if you read the Dhamma in translated in English, you might have heard of there is no doer of a deed, or one who reaps the deed's result. Phenomena alone flow on, no other view than this is right. Or another place where we see there is no kamma in result, nor does result exist in kamma. Though they are void of one another, there is no fruit without the kamma. So this is another stage where anatta can become clearer and clearer. Also, I want to remind the listener that when we think of a phenomena being born because of several causes or several conditions, we will understand that this phenomena actually is dependent on these causes and conditions to arise. This fact or this understanding will help us understand that this phenomenon has no control over its existence. Dependent on conditions, it will arise. If the conditions do not exist, it will not arise. Again, this will also show that this phenomena is anatta. Why? Because atta, self, usually means that there is some type of control over one's existence. Self means that one can control when one is born or why it is born and what happens thereafter. But when we understand that all phenomena, except Nibbāna, all phenomena are born of causes, then we can understand that all these phenomena are actually anatta because they also do not have control. So now in meditation we came across two ways in which we begin to understand anatta more clearly. But of course, it does not stop there. The Buddha also teaches us how to understand anatta when we continue to discern arising and perishing of nama and rupa. Because rupa arises and perishes, we can understand it as anicca. Because of arising and perishing, there is a certain type of oppression. We can understand this as dukkha. And when we understand this anicca and this dukkha, we will also begin to have a clear understanding of anatta. There is no core, there is no sense of having a core in this phenomena of nama-rupa. When we discern rise and fall, we will begin to understand this. Also, when we discern rise and fall, we will begin to understand that there is no control. We will begin to understand that there is no self, no doer, no experiencer, no one person who is his own master. And all of this will help us understand that nama and rupa is anatta. This development of anatta actually continues throughout vipassana. Throughout vipassana, it continues. And it's important to understand that anatta has to be very, very, very clear in one's mind with regard to all phenomena. Because only when it is very clear that one can understand or realize Nibbāna. If we look at the Dhamma, you might remember Sabbe Dhamma Anattati Yada Panyaya Passati Ata Nibbindati Dukke Eso Maggo Visuddhiya. In this first part of this stanza, we can understand that all Dhammas are anatta, non-self. So in this case, all Dhammas means all the five aggregates or nama rupa and Nibbāna. So all of them are anatta. So we have to understand that if we know all the five aggregates clearly, it is only then that we can see Nibbāna. And when we know all the five aggregates or nama rupa clearly, it means that we know anatta very, very clearly. So again, anatta is very important on this path, and it is also one of the reasons why I wanted to discuss about anatta today. Another final thing I want to mention before we conclude this Dhamma talk is that I've noticed a lot of meditators who do not discern anatta clearly, who do not know anatta clearly, tend to try to realize Nibbāna in opposition to what they have not seen clearly. What does this mean? I will give an example. Let's say a person has, to a certain level, discerned nama rupa, or thinks he has discerned nama rupa, and he has a certain idea of nama rupa. Once this idea is created, since he has not seen non-self fully or clearly, in his mind he has a certain idea that there are certain things here, even at a very subtle level. And then he thinks, okay, these are the things I discerned. Nibbāna is opposite to this. And when Nibbāna is opposite to this is what I should see. So when he tries to see this, then he actually falls into a trap of not seeing real Nibbāna, but creating an experience of seeing Nibbāna. Nibbāna is void relative to actually what he hasn't discerned, what he hasn't seen. So this is one of the mistakes I've noticed in recent times, where yogis describe emptiness and voidness, but it is in relationship to phenomena they have not seen. And this is actually quite important, because even though we discuss Nibbāna as Tanha Nirodho, or the cessation of craving, and so on and so forth, these are words that are used to describe Nibbāna. Nibbāna itself does not have a counterpart. It's not exactly an opposite to anything. Nibbāna is Nibbāna, and it is Anatta. The same way, or one way to understand five aggregates is that the five aggregates are also Anatta. So when we see the five aggregates as Anatta clearly and know it clearly, we will not try to find Nibbāna as an opposite, or as in opposition to these five aggregates. Actually, around that time, we will understand that only when we develop meditation further and further, and when the Bodhipakya Dhammas are very, very powerful, then the Magga Chitta will arise, and the person will see Nibbāna via the Magga Chitta. So Nibbāna is not in opposition to any of these things. It's an absolute element, the unformed element, or the deathless element. And the five aggregates themselves are actually absolute in nature when it comes to Anatta. They are not relatively Anatta to something else. Their absolute nature consists of Anatta. So I think these points will give the listeners a certain level of understanding of what they have to develop when it comes to truly understanding Anatta. Remember, Anatta is not something we spend time thinking about and trying to understand via thinking. It's something that we actually practice towards. And when we practice towards it, that's when we understand it very, very clearly. Of course, this does not mean that we do not think, or we do not read and try to understand and get information about Anatta. Of course we do, and all of that can contribute. But when we continue to go deeper and deeper into the meditation, the thinking begins to reduce, and knowing directly the nature of Anatta begins to increase, up to the point when the person will know all phenomena are Anatta. Okay, so on this Vesak Day, on this special day of the Buddha, the Bodhisattva's birth, the Bodhisattva's attainment of supreme enlightenment, and our Buddha's passing into Parinibbāna, I wanted to share this message of Anatta with you, and I hope listening to this will incline your mind to study Buddhism more, meditate more, and practice Sila, Samadhi, Panya more, so that one day we all can escape the sufferings of samsara. Thiruvon Saranai.